Yan, ayan. Ayan na. Ito na. Nag-speech na ang ating Pangulong Ferdinand Marcos Jr. sa United Nations. So mukhang not one but dalawang Marcos mukhang nag-speech dyan sa Amerika. At of course, marami mga reactions dyan. 6-7 a.m. pa lang gumising tayo para magpa-interview dyan with BBC News International. Yung iba nakita niya yung mga snapshots or screenshots, no, ng ating interview with BBC on President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s speech sa United Nations. Of course, ay nako, ito na naman, maraming kumukontra, maraming may reaction. Siguro tomorrow, guys, I'll have a detailed breakdown nung trip ni Ferdinand Marcos Jr. sa Amerika, yung ringing of the closing bells dyan sa New York Stock Exchange, wing of investments, yung kanyang speech sa United Nations, yung content niya, bakit ganun yung speech niya, what does it say about priorities under this current president. Siguro tomorrow na lang pag-usapan natin because today, of course, is a big day because today marks the 50th anniversary ng Declaration of Martial Law, which really changed the direction of our country essentially for the next half a century, no? As you can see, we have another Marcos in power, so obviously you can connect the dots, no? Unless medyo ayaw mo mag-connect ng dots or may problema ka talaga, naghahang ka. Okay, so yun na. The thing was, his speech more or less coincided. I think mga 3 p.m. siya sa US, so mga 3 a.m. today yun, if I'm not mistaken. So na-coincide siya, interestingly, I mean, with the very important anniversary. Now, pag-usapan natin more of this now. And then, as I said, tomorrow siguro we'll talk more about yung kanyang speech sa United Nations. At maraming reaction, yung mga nag-react dyan, bakit empty daw, parang wala daw nanonood. Sabi ko naman, mukhang hindi lang naman siya yung nagkakaroon ng problema sa audience. So, for instance, this is a speech by Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany. Wala rin masyadong dumaan. So, I don't know what does it say. Konti lang ba bumunta dyan? Konti lang ba interesado? May mga ibang memes and may mga posts na iba dyan. Huwag na natin patulan or siguro bukas na lang. But for today, siguro magbigay tayo ng pugay sa mga biktima ng martial law. One of the darkest days in our history. So in fact, there's a new movie called 11,103. So ito po yung numero ng mga biktima ng martial law. Marami sa kanila ay buhay pa at kasama po natin. And a lot of them, of course, are struggling against erasure from our history. No? So ito yung pelikula ni Jeanette Ifurong and Mike Alcazaren, no? 11,103. No? So ito po ay about the victims of martial law. Alright? Isa po siyang documentary, no? Ukol sa batas militar at sila rin po yung mga directors ng batas militar at patay kung patay, no? So it tracks the lives of a selected few who are recognized by Republic Act number 10368. So ito po ay otherwise known as Human Rights Victims Reparation and Recognition Act of 2013. Ito po yung mga biktima ng martial law na acknowledged by our state, by our laws, no? At they are entitled to compensation, no? So may mga efforts na by artists, by historians, by experts to keep the memories of the victims of martial law alive. Now, before I go deeper into this issue, let me point out a number of things, no? And I'll try to keep this as short as possible. Now, as far as nung kapalpakan ng mga ibang administrations is concerned, especially yung mga after martial law, after the Marcos dictatorship, what happened in the past does not necessarily excuse yung mga failures nila. Especially failures in terms of fixing yung mga problems na inherit from the dictatorship era. So ang ayoko rin naman mangyari dito is i-blame lahat-lahat sa isang partido. Parang i-blame mo sa isang partido yung 100% ng problem when sila yung responsible for 70% of the problem. So the 30%, someone still should take responsibility for that. So dapat guys, meron din tayong accountability dun sa mga sumunod na presidente at administration at kanilang kapalpakan. Which actually brings me to the second issue. We talk about 11,000 victims of martial law, pero ilan po yung biktima ng extrajudicial killings or alleged victims of extrajudicial killings in the past 6 years of Tatay presidency? Some would say 6,000, some would say 10,000, some would say 30,000, some would say more than 30,000, depending on numbers we're looking at by Human Rights Watch, by the United Nations, among others. So the lowest numbers we saw are 5 to 6,000. And those were not even updated numbers. So, as much as we want to talk about what happened 50 years ago, let's also not forget yung nangyari in the past 5 or 6 years. Marami sa atin ay hindi pa buhay nung panahon ng martial law, right? Now, that doesn't mean na yung mga buhay lang nung panahon ng martial law ay may karapatan na magsalita. That doesn't work on multiple levels because first of all, there's something called memory gaps. There's something called also nostalgia, when people suddenly have distorted, romanticized memory of the past. At pangatlo, kung ganyan ang usapin kasaysayan, di wag na natin pag-usapan ng World War II kung hindi ka si Enrile. Siguro si Enrile lang pwede mag-usap until 1935 Constitution natin. Wag na natin pag-usapan si Rizal. Wag na natin pag-usapan yung panahon ng mga prophets. Wala naman buhay nun, di ba? As far as yung mga kasama natin ngayon is concerned. So I find that argument completely stupid to say that only people who were alive at this period have the right to say something or are necessarily correct. In fact, science shows that people tend to have faulty memory of the past because of their frustrations with the present. Kaya nga authoritarian nostalgia. And it's even more stupid, I'm sorry to say this, because just because you had a good time, you and your family or your tropa had good time in the darkest era for the country, that doesn't make it good for everyone. Alam mo yung mga katulad ng mga tao, kunyari, nahuli isang walang hiya na rapist or criminal. Tapos tinanong yung isa, ay, ewan ko doon, basta mabait naman siya sa akin eh. So what kung mabait siya sa'yo? Criminal siya. It doesn't change the fact. But yung mga criminal na walang yang tao, there's someone that they're nice to, but that doesn't make it correct. That doesn't make it correct. That doesn't make them good. So just because you and your family had good times in the darkest era for the country or whatever, doesn't make the situation better for the rest of the country, right? So good for you. And in fact, the question is, bakit kaya it was good for you? Ano kaya mga ginagawa niyong panahon na yan? Gets mo? So you can push the argument like that. So completely preposterous yung argument na kung hindi ka pinanganak ng panahon na yan, wala kang karapatan magsalita. Di wag na natin pag-usapan si Rizal. Sino pang buhay nun? Si Mang Jay na lang kausapin natin. Siguro siya na lang pwede magsalita. Pero hanggang 1935 Constitution lang yata mabutan natin. Hindi si Aguinaldo eh. O yung batas. Ayan tayo eh. Ayan tayo. Umiinit talaga ulo natin kung mga katangan. I'm sorry. Ayan na. Okay. Kalmado lang tayo sa panahon ngayon. Uy, wala na yung si Sa panahon ngayon, kalmado tayo. Napalis na pala. Wala na si Kalmado lang tayo. Sa panahon ngayon. Ayan. Sir, kalmado lang tayo. Ay, nako. So, wag rin natin kalimutan yung kapalpakan ng mga sumunod na presidente. Which brings me to the issue ng mga EJK, extrajudicial killings, massive abuses, human rights violations, corruptions, all sorts of craziness scandals that didn't happen just 50 years ago, but happened over the past 5-10 years or so. Right? Huwag natin din kalimutan yan. Alright? So yan ayoko rin yung ganun na, zoom in lang tayo dyan, kalimutan natin. No. Para sa akin, weird yun eh. Parang weird yun. Bakit natin kalimutan yung mga EJK at human rights violation? Or huwag natin i-emphasize din yan. I-emphasize natin. So, yun ang sinasabi ko. Huwag tayong magkakaroon ng either recency bias or anti-recency bias. Right? Recency bias means binibigyan mo lang ng kahalagaan yung nangyari recently. Right? Or yung kabaliktaran nun. Alright? Kabaliktaran nun. At kaya nga may hustisya tayo because justice is not about memory. It's also about accountability. Okay. I want to say something more here, but ay nako. Now, puntahan natin itong argumento na, 50 years ago na yan, kalimutan na natin yan, tagal na yan, forget about it. Okay, I have a lot of problems with that kind of quote-unquote argument on multiple levels. First of all, marami sa mga henyong yan na nagsabi, kalimutan na natin yung 50 years ago, ang tagal na yan, dapat wala tayong paki dyan. Same na mga henyo na yan ay nagsabi, talagang masamang Amerika, balikan natin sila sa Balanggiga Bells. Yeah, I mean, I'm 100% for keeping in mind yung mga krimen ng mga dayuhan sa atin. Mga Espanyol, mga Amerikano. I'm 100% for that. But what I don't like is, palakpakan kay tatay when he goes after US over what happened in Balanggiga, when? 100 years ago? And then, bigla pagdating sa 50 years ago, sobrang tagal na yung kalimutan na natin. That selectiveness in favor of something even more in the distant past doesn't make sense to me at all. As in, doesn't make sense to me at all. It's the worst kind of selectiveness. Self-serving argumentation and selectiveness. So as much as I'm 100% for making sure na wag natin kalimutan yung mga krimen ng mga dayuhan sa atin, mga Amerikano, mga Espanyol, panahon ng colonial era I'm talking about. Not talking about now, I'm talking colonial era. Di lalong dapat hindi natin kalimutan yung nangyari 50 years ago. Right? Lalong-lalo na, kung ayaw natin kalimutan yung ginawa ng dayuhan sa atin, mas dapat hindi natin kalimutan yung ginawa ng sariling atin sa atin. No? When you have leaders of our own flesh and blood going against our own people, that's even worse than colonial masters oppressing our people. That's even worse. Even worse than Espanyol Guardia Civil or American soldiers abusing us is our own people abusing us. Is our own leaders abusing us. Is our own... Do you get what I'm saying? That's even worse. Kasi sa kapwa natin yan eh. That's even worse. Right? So, as much as I'm all for, right? Keeping in mind, yung mga kasalanan ng mga dayuhan sa atin, how they stole our revolution from us, how they stole their freedom from us, lahat ng mga colonial crimes nila sa atin, 100 years ago, 300 years ago, mas mahalaga na hindi mo makalimutan yung mga krimen na ginawa ng mga leaders natin nang galing sa atin mismo. People of our own flesh and blood, of our own quote-unquote race or ethnicity or whatever. Mas hindi dapat kalimutan yan. Kaya napaka-stupid yung argument na kalimutan na natin yung nangyari sa 50 years ago, pero biglang go tayo dyan sa ginawa ng America 100 years ago or ginawa ng Espanyol 200 years ago, 300 years ago. That doesn't make sense to me at all. I'm really sorry about that. No, actually, I'm not really sorry. I'm not sorry. It really doesn't make sense at all. Alright? Now, the other thing we have to keep in mind is 50 years ago means that if yung mga tao nung panahon na yan, marami sa kanila ay buhay pa. Given yung life expectancy, average life expectancy mga Pilipino is above 70 years. A bit higher for women. So this makes it in fact even more palpable, right? Because dun sa 11,000 victims, dun sa mga victims na torture pero hindi pinatay, marami sa kanila are still among us. Some of them are mothers, are sisters, are fathers, are brothers, are teachers. May mga naging professor ako na biktima ng martial law, na torture po sila, no? I know personal people who were victimized. They bear the marks of torture. Some of them were sexually assaulted, right? Horrible things happened to them. They're still among us. So napakawalang hiya naman yung argument na kalimutan na natin yan. And dyan pa nung buhay pa naman yung mga biktima. Binabastos mo sila eh. Bastusan na yan eh. Hindi ka nga tumutulong sa sitwasyon, tapos babastusin mo pa yung kanilang sitwasyon. Right? You denigrate pa their situation. Tapos i-victim blame mo pa sila. Siguro na-torture sila kasi may ginawa silang gano'n. Walang ya. Ginagaslight pa yung mga biktima. May batas na nga po tayo eh. Binasa ko nga, mga henyo. Makinig, yung mga henyo. May batas na po tayo. May Compensation Act na dapat dyan. Ito, Republic Act number 10368. Ito po yung batas natin. Human Rights Victims Reparation and Recognition Act of 2013. May batas na po tayo. Recognize na po yan na ating saligang batas. Ano ba yan? It's a legal, political, even spiritual fact that abuses happen and we have to ensure accountability and we have to, at the very least, honor the memory of these people, a lot of them living still among us. Yun lang sinasabi natin dito. I am not here in any partisan capacity. Sabi ko nga kanina may kapalpakan din yung mga ibang presidente, dapat may pananagutan. Pero there are degrees There's magnitude diba? And what we're talking about here is a regime that lasted for 21 years. Now, if you want to remove the pre-martial law years, then you're still talking about roughly 15 years, no? That's still longer than any other Filipino president. By far, by far. The closest to that is GMA at 9 years, no? So you have to keep that in mind. You're talking about a long period of control. So, the other reason why you cannot forget what happened 50 years ago is because the regime that the regime that was created 50 years ago had long-term implication dito sa ating mga institution, right? You're talking about massive corruption. You're talking about extrajudicial killings. You're talking about all sorts of abuses. You're talking about big, massive debt, no? Now, may mga henyo dyan sinasabi, well, marami namang kalsadang ginawa. Parang, kahit naman sino ilagay mo dyan ng 21 years at utang lang siya ng utang, no? Pwede naman siya gumawa ng kalsada. In fact, any moderately competent leader would not have only made kalsada, airports, whatever, would have made sure the Philippines by now has Hyundai, LG, Samsung, etc. Oh, sinong henyo dyan? Sige lang, sabihin nyo sa akin, give me an example of the world-class industries, manufacturing industries that we created. Anything close to what we had in neighboring countries. Yes, sa Korea, meron silang diktador, si Park Chung-hee. Horrible human rights violations. At the same time, he oversaw the establishment of world-class industries and manufacturing sectors. Taiwan, under the heirs of Chiang Kai-shek, the Kuomintang, brutal people, no question about it. At the same time, they laid down the foundation for one of the most dynamic, technological advanced countries in the world. O wag na tayo dyan sa South Korea, Taiwan, medyo masyadong advanced. Di punta tayo sa Malaysia. Malaysia may proton na sila. Even Indonesia, even Thailand. Let's not even go to Singapore. Lahat sila may authoritarian leaders. But under their authoritarian leaders, they at least establish infant industries or even more advanced manufacturing sectors. Some of our neighbors have even national cars. Some of our neighbors are massive manufacturing-driven economies. Tayo, someone at 21 years in power, tell me, anong ginawa niya? What are the world-class industries that were created? Yun ang tanong ko. Kasi anyone you put 21 years in charge of 21 years, guys, that's a long time. Gumawa ng kalsada ganun, wala yan. Chicken yan. In 21 years, yes, chicken yan. Especially if inutang-utang lang naman marami dyan. Kahit sino naman pwede gumawa nun But to build world-class industries, that's what other dictators did in our neighboring countries. Even in Latin America, even the military dictatorships in Brazil, even some of the horrible leaders in Latin America, they were able to build better manufacturing sectors and economies than us. So, please lang, don't throw me this argument, but at least may ginawang kalsada, may gano'n. Pare, 21 years pa naman. Tapos marami pa dyan, utang pa. Nasaan yung, ang tanong ko, kung magaling talaga, nasaan yung world-class industries? Yun lang naman tanong ko 21 years, guys. In that 21 years na pag-iwanan tayo ng marami sa ating kapitbahay. Di ba, pinakita ko sa inyo, number 1 tayo in early 1960s. Early 1960s. Sinong presidente nun? Si Macapagal. Now, obviously, Macapagal was overseeing the decline of the Philippines already. I'm not saying he was a great president. But by 1985, wala pa si Corazon Aquino's president dyan. We were number 4 in ASEAN. Pinakita ko sa inyo yung numbers. The facts are there. Basahin nyo yan. Now, ito kasi yung problema ko If you don't know your history, if you have a distorted view of history, you have distorted political views. And you have distorted political views, you have distorted voting patterns and voting behaviors. You have distorted voting patterns, behavior, you keep on electing horrible leaders, and you keep on keeping your country in a vicious cycle. Right? That's the problem. That's why we have to understand what happened 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago. Especially when you have these massive, massive turning points in our history. Now, naalala niyo, pinag-usapan natin, panon ng election pa lang, yung concept ng path dependency. When you do major things today, they can shape your trajectory for the foreseeable future. In fact, I gave you an example, kind of a visualization of that. Diba? Alam niyo yung movie ni Matt Damon, diba? Yung movie nila, The Bureau. Diba? Like, kung hindi umupo si Matt Damon dito, hindi niya ma-meet yung itong babae, so hindi na siya maging presidente, ganun-ganun, right? So, when you make major decisions in life, when you're at the crossroads and make major decisions, that completely changes the trajectory of your personal life, right? Like your decision to study in a certain place, or your decision not to study in a certain place. Well, guess what? Creating a dictatorship was a major turning point in Philippine history, right? And it had huge long-term implications pagdating sa development, evolution of ating institutions. A lot of our problems today, you can trace it back to what was happening in that 21 years, or at least the 15 years, right? A lot of abuses, a lot of patronage politics. Now, again, let's be clear, marami rin kapalpakan yung ibang presidente, marami rin kalokohan nangyari sa ibang presidente, marami rin kalokohan nangyari from the oligarchs, from people sa LGU level. We're not saying that didn't happen, guys. Let's be very, very clear about that. Because ang pinakaayoko rin nangyari dito is blame lang isang tao for 100%. When maybe that person or that family can be blamed for 50% or 60% or 70%. But still the 30% should not be forgotten. Yan ang problema natin. Binary tayo mag-isip. Either anghel mga to or demonyo sila. When in fact, the reality is much more complicated. They have 50%, 60% culpability, but cannot be blamed for everything. And now, in fact, what we're seeing is the reverse of that. Now, they're blaming the Aquinos for everything that went wrong in the Philippines. And then kinalimutan yung ginawa nung isa nung 10 years sa office, yung isa 21 years in office, yung isa 6 years in office. Kinalimutan lahat yan, biniblame lang yung dalawang Aquinos for everything. So this is the reverse version of that. What we need to do for proper political analysis is to apportion culpability based on the proper assessment of the available evidence, right? And then from there, you work it through, all right? So, as I said, what happened 50 years ago had long-term implications because of those path dependency issue, right? Once you made that big decision, it set in motion a whole chain of events that it's still influencing us until today. Case in point, look at who's occupying the Malacanang again, right? Case in point, look at the polarized state of our politics. Again, I'm not blaming one person per se. I'm just saying that was a big decision. That was a very big decision that really shaped us. And another thing that it affected was it more or less destroyed the party system in the Philippines. The party system in the Philippines actually was so-so in the 50s and 60s. Meron kang dalawang partido, more or less may distinctions, liberal, nationalista. That was completely destroyed during the martial law period. And it was never rebuilt again. But let's not forget the original sin. It was destroyed in the martial law period. So if that two-party system was given a chance to grow, probably would have been closer to some of our neighbors who have functional two-party systems. South Korea and Taiwan, medyo feisty, sometimes literally get into fist fights dun sa parliament nila, but pretty much clear political party fights. You know the party of Yoon versus the party of, let's say, Moon, for instance. Yoon versus Moon. Or you know the party of Kuomintang versus the party of Tsai Ing-wen. DPP versus KMT. Nawala yan sa atin kasi nasira yung party system na yan And the examples keep on piling up. And not to mention the cronies. Ang dami mga cronies na sobrang kurakot ng ginawa. There's no accountability whatsoever. Now, again, the reason you see barely me mentioning even names is because I don't want to make this about families. Awayan ng pamilya lang. Ayoko ito maging issue ng partisanship lang. Ayoko ng ganon. Because once we go down there, personalan na yan, ethnic loyalties na yan, solid this versus solid that, ayoko yan. Ang sinasabi ko lang, ito po yung katotohanan. Ito po yung situation, ito po yung long-term implication. So we cannot say, let's just forget about it and it didn't happen. Or let's just move forward. Because for me, as long as we're not getting the right lessons from evidence-based understanding of the past, it will be very difficult for us to have the kind of political maturity, decision-making maturity, leadership maturity that we need in order to be a successful democracy and nation in the 21st century. Yun po talagang challenge natin. So if you notice, I barely mention family names here or names here because I don't want this to be about names. I want this to be about records, about legacy, about institutional impact, about long-term relevance, about the historical big picture. Yan dapat ang approach natin. And unfortunately, maraming tao dyan, they rather keep this at the level of personalan, personal attacks, family versus family, dynasty versus dynasty, ethnicity versus ayoko yan. I don't want to go down that road. And I don't think that has been helpful. I think that's exactly what keeps us from growing as a country. Because so long as gawin natin ito about personality politics, then madali naman maghanap ng problema kahit sino. Wala naman perpekto sa atin eh. Lahat naman tayo may topak eh. Di ba? Madali naman maghanap ng problema kahit kanino eh. But once you talk at the level of legacy, of policy, of institutional legacy, no? Policy legacy, then mas maayos ang usapan because you can look at the evidence, at the numbers, di ba? Again, so, as I said, everything we say here is based on evidence. Everything we say is based on evidence. All right? Everything is, I have a long bibliography there. You can check everything like that. But, now, kung gusto mong ng, pa-blogger na lang at kaloko, bahala ka na sa buhay mo. Enjoy your ignorance. But the problem is that your ignorance is not creating bliss for the rest. It's bringing down everyone. Right? So, yun ang problema eh. Maybe ignorance is bliss to you, but not to the rest. So, that's something that you have to keep in mind. Now, again, pakita natin ito, yung mga henyo dyan. Ito, this is just one slice of the facts we have to look at. I'm even putting aside the issue of human rights and democracy, which, by the way, is very important. But just look at the economics legacy. You'll have an idea what we're talking about here. And you'll see. Again, ito. Ito, again, IMF numbers, international numbers to. Ito, 1960, Philippines number 1. Ayan. So, look at it. Papunta na tayo sa best president ever. Tingnan nyo, by 1985, nasaan na tayo? Ayan so 1960, we started number 1, and then we have the Asian Development Bank. And then look at it. Just look at the timing. Look at where the Philippines is going. Okay, unti-unting nararating. Ayan. Pababa at pababa, spaghetti. Ayan. Number 3 na, 2 and 3 na tayo from number 1. Ayan. Pababa. Tingnan nyo ulit yan. By 1985. Ayan. Panoorin lang yan. Diba? Ipopost natin yan. And keep in mind, yung population din natin, lumalaki itong time na to. So this is just gross domestic product. We're not even looking at per capita income. Tingnan mo yung data, 78, 1979. Alright, tingnan nyo ulit, Tingnan nyo, by 1985, 1 year before babaksak yung dictatorship na yan, ano nang pwesto natin? 1982, 1983, 1984, 1985. Boom! Number 4. See? Number 4. Tapos sisisiin si Cory. Wala pa nga si Cory dito eh. Ayan Number 4 tayo. Galing natin, di ba? Ayan. 1985, number 4 na tayo. 1960, number 1 tayo. Okay? Ayan tayo. Ayan tayo. So, World Bank at International Monetary Fund, yung data, you can double check it yourself, right? I can send also the link here. Yeah. This is just the economics, guys. Now, again, this doesn't excuse yung kapalpakan at corruption na nangyari sa mga susunod na presidente. Let me be absolutely clear about that. But, it's not like Corazon Aquino started from 1 or 0. She started from negative and had to push it up, right? That's the thing you also shouldn't forget, speaking of context, no? Right. As I said, every president had their shortcomings in one way or another. But there are levels to it. And some presidents, some of them had a lot of time in power, and they left a far more enduring legacy, right? And you can guess who had the most enduring legacy. And based on our discussion, you can see how positive or negative that legacy was overall. Of course, all presidents, even with President Duterte, I even criticized him on so many levels, but he also had some good legacies. For instance, I think sa Bangsamoro, I think he did some good things. I think on infrastructure development, there were some improvements. So, no, it's not true that some presidents are completely wrong and some are completely right. That's not true. We should never approach politics like that. Pag ginawa natin personalan, fanaticism na papasok dito. Kulto-kulto na yung papasok dito. At ayaw natin pumunta dyan. Huwag tayo pumunta dyan. Kung usapan pamilya, loyalty ng usapan dyan, huwag tayo pupunta dyan. Alright? Ayan, sabi ng isa, Pogo yung legacy. Ayan tayo. Ayan tayo. Anyway, kaya nga today, I didn't want to talk about the UN speech as much. Gusto ko bukas para medyo, kasi ang hirap na isabay pareho. Because tomorrow we'll talk about some of the good things naman that are happening naman at some of, I think, the good highlights of the speech by Marcos Jr. and some of the positive good things he's doing. So I want to talk about that tomorrow. But for today, I wanted to remind us of some historical facts and reality. We had one president who had more than 20 years in power. And what is the legacy? Economic-wise pa lang. Where is our version of Hyundai? Forget about Hyundai. Proton man lang wala tayo. Forget about Proton. Kahit Thailand, Indonesia level of manufacturing, wala tayo. 20 years in power, bakit hindi natin establish yan? Because 70s and 80s was precisely where most of our neighbors were able to build the foundations of their massive manufacturing sector today. Practically all of them. All the successful ones you're looking at, the crucial years were 1970s and early 1980s. Yan ang dapat you keep in mind. But as I said, I barely mention names here, etc. because ayoko papunta dyan. Now, may mga nagsasalita dyan na ma-absent na lang kami bukas. Let me give you an enticement. Pag-usapan din po natin bukas si Mang Johnny. Because si Mang Johnny po ay may analysis with Robin Hood. Ininbita yata siya ni Robin Hood. Ito. Si Legend. Ininbita po siya kahapon, or basta isang araw recently sa Senate. At pinag-usapan po niya yung mga iba't ibang constitution. And base sa alam natin, siya lang yung political figure na nakaranas ng hindi isa, pero 3 konstitusyon, no? So, ayon sa kanya, naranasan ko mabuhay sa ilalim ng 1935 Constitution, 1973 Constitution, at naranasan ko rin po ang mabuhay sa ilalim ng Constitution ng war regime ni Jose P. Laurel. Okay, 4 constitutions pala, sorry. At may mga ideas siya, mungkahi siya pagdating sa Constitution. Ayan. So, kung ayaw yung makinig sa analysis ko sa UN, eto na lang ang abangan nyo. Pag-usapan po natin yung committee hearings by Robin Hood at mga comments ni Mang Johnny going back to 1935 Constitution and Japanese occupation era. So, medyo next level na yan. Alright? Pag-usapan din natin yan, isama natin dyan sa UN speech. Okay? Alright, magpapasalamat na ako kasi kailangan may marami tayong gagawin. 6 a.m. pa ako gising. Alright, I mean, you could see. Mamaya na natin pag-usapan ng Jurassic Park, yung mga ganun. Alright, mamaya na tayo mag-science class. Thank you very much kay Novelita Labrador. Thank you kay Annabelle Gamoras for joining us. Kay Angel Lu, thank you so much for joining us. Kay Orfa Montelihaw. Yan, marami po yung mga mababait dyan na sumasali na sa atin dyan. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Doon sa mga nagbigyan ng star and support. Yan, si Braf Pitt, mag-absent na daw siya bukas. Si Mitch Tengcho, ayan, may comment siya. Ayoko nang basahin. Mahirap na. Bakit yung iba kailangan pa ng approval? Di ko magets. Bakit yung iba may approval pa? Bakit may guest request pa ako? Ano ba yan? Di ko gets. Ano bang kalokohan itong meta-meta na ito? Salamat kay Maria Agnes Cacho. Yan, si Alan Roque, marami siyang comments sa Pogo. Ayan, mga experts yan. Si Robert Kinagoran, may tanong siya, after 1986, anong number ng Philippines, Prof? Ayan, number 5 na yata tayo. So, kaya nga sabi ko may kapalpakan din yung sumunod Unfair naman sabi mo, yung isa lang may kasalanan lahat. Number 5 lang yata tayo ngayon Number 5 tayo? I think so, no? Although malapit na tayo mapag-iwanan ni Vietnam, so baka bababa tayo sa number 6. Let's see. No, I think the Philippines has a chance to be actually number 3 or 2 in the next 10 to 50 years. 10 to 15 years, by the way. 10 to 15 years. If we maintain our current trajectory. Thank you kay Edan Olonan. Thank you so much again for your support. Thank you sa mga nagbigay ng stars. Kay Pelagio Jaide, thank you very much. Thank you kay Ma'am Cristina Nunez. Yan, saludo din po sa inyo. Thank you very much for joining us. Ayan, kay Malu Panyo, kay Lolita Campaniero. Muchas gracias. Thank you kay Jill, Sarah, Lara. Yan, educational daw. Thank you. Kaya nga guys, pansin nyo, ayoko magpangalan mga pamilya, mga ganyan. Kasi ayoko na yan. Mababa na level yan. Ayoko pumunta dyan. Once maging personalan, wala nang size yung usapan natin. Natasha Tamin, thank you very much. Polo Carpio, thank you very much for your support. Kay Ma'am Fanny San Miguel, as always, thank you so much for your kind support. Yan, appreciate it natin dyan. Si Riz Ani, wala ba si Ma'am Jocelyn? Salamat kay Kant Pan, kay Ella Fernandez Matic, Michael Sadumiano, thank you so much for joining us. Sorry guys, talaga freestyle ako today. I'm just letting it out. Well, hindi na tayo mga Gina Nazario, thank you for your support. Thank you kay Grace Kitayama, Tomarigato, thank you very much for joining. Kay JCD Sorenses, yan. Maraming fans. Ayan na, maraming triggered. Margaret Rodriguez, thank you so much for your support. Kay Katrina Paladin Frias, as always, thank you so much. Saan na si Noemi? Elimal Rosales, thank you so much also for joining us. Maria Esmeralda, thank you also kay Janus Fernando, kay Zoe Goko. Yan, thank you so much sa lahat ng mga nagbigay ng star and support. Yung friend natin, sorry, I cannot read Mandarin, but you know who you are. Thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it. Ayan, lahat ng mga nag-comment dito. Basta please, abangan nyo, marami pa tayong discussion na maganda sana. Ayoko yung personalan, ayoko yung basta ayoko ng ganun, guys. Ayoko yung mga helicopter discussions, chopper, helicopter. Ayun na naman tayo. Ayun tayo. Basta kahit may chopper, helicopter, wag na natin patulan yan. Ibang na yan. Alright. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much sa lahat ng mga prayers and support nyo. I really, really appreciate it, and we really need it in these difficult times. And my prayers and love also to your family and loved ones. Yung mga if you have family who are unwell, if you have loved ones who are not in their best shape, my prayers and love for them, for the recovery, etc. And thank you also for your prayers and recovery for my loved ones. I really, really appreciate it. Maraming salamat, and pasensya na lang if medyo nag-French tayo kanina. Hindi naman French. Usapang kalye. Thank you rin dyan sa cousin natin, si Patricia, joining us. Pa-snow pa siya sa Australia. Hindi ko alam pala may ganun snow pala doon. Good for you. Alright, maraming salamat. Thank you very much. Ayan na si Noemi Tablate. Noemi, right? Noemi, ayan. Kaya. Alright. Thank you very much. Talk to you guys soon. God bless. Hasta mañana, God willing. Maraming salamat. Adios.